The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 14th chapter. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to Jesus, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." Then Jesus ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The Gospel of the Lord. Matthew chapter 14 puts us in a northern area around the Sea of Galilee. And it takes place with about a year or so left in the ministry of Jesus before his crucifixion and death in Jerusalem. So he's 2/3 of the way, approximately, 2/3 of the way through his ministry at this point. Closer to the end of his ministry, his public ministry, than the beginning of it. There are 2 miracles in the Bible, in the New Testament, that are covered by all 4 of the Gospels. The resurrection of Jesus is one, and this, the feeding of those thousands of people, is the other that's covered in all 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That gives us an idea of how important this event was and is still. So it starts off by saying, now when Jesus heard this, and that refers to some news that he received about the death of John the Baptist. When he heard that news, he withdrew from there, probably around Capernaum. He withdrew from around Capernaum in a boat to a desolate place by himself. Now, he took his team with him. He took his disciples with him, but it was just them. His reaction to hearing terrible news was that he wanted to get away, have some quiet time. He needed some downtime to cope with John's death because Jesus was fully human and fully God. And it's so easy to forget the human side of Jesus. But it's the human side of Jesus that amplifies his divinity because it makes it so much more applicable and personal to us. Maybe Jesus just wanted to get away with his best friends, these disciples. Maybe they want to do some fishing, camping out, just shoot the breeze, tell stories around a campfire. Just enjoy his time on earth and the people with whom he associated. But his plans were foiled by the needs of mankind. This goes on to say in the gospel, when the crowds heard it, I guess they heard and they saw that he was leaving, they followed him on foot from the towns. Now, if you were going to hand draw in the air, that place, you would draw a picture of the Sea of Galilee. You'd find Capernaum, which is a northwest area of the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus and his team got into the boat. They headed east across the top portion of the Sea of Galilee. They could be seen by the shore. They could be seen getting into the boat, and they could be seen as they progressed east. People watched this, and they decided to follow the progress of Jesus, not just by watching, but by actually going in the direction in which he was going at that time. So you can picture Jesus and 12 other guys in the boat, a fishing boat, heading east. And then people walking around the perimeter of the shore. And as this group of people moved further and further east, tracking the progress of Jesus, people came out of little towns and little villages and communities and homes and joined this parade. And it would have looked like a parade. All these people marching east, thousands and thousands of people moving east. And this story probably proves that you can walk faster than you can sail or row. Because when Jesus got to that northeastern part of the Sea of Galilee, he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. That's not what he wanted to see, but he saw a great crowd. And in seeing the crowd, he had compassion on them. Other gospel accounts talk about he viewed them as sheep without a shepherd. He understood their human need. So he had compassion on the crowd and healed their sick. So you would have had this massive healing service. Certainly there was prayer and teaching at the same time and preaching. That's not what Jesus went to do. He had his own needs as a human, his own needs that he needed to deal with. But Jesus put his needs aside and decided to serve the needs of man. He put himself second, and he put others first. Just like the great commandments tell us, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those commandments encourage us. They demand us to put ourselves second, and others, including God, first. Jesus now exemplifies that. So he was doing this, obviously, all day. And then his disciples come to him when it was getting toward evening. And they relay to Jesus two blindingly obvious facts. The first one was, they said, this is a desolate place. Jesus knew it was desolate. There were no cities where they were. He understood it was desolate. He could look around and make that conclusion. And they also said, and the day is now over. So it's late afternoon toward evening. Jesus could tell what time of day it was. He didn't wear a wristwatch, but he could see the setting sun. He understood it was desolate. He understood that night was coming. And now the disciples tell Jesus what they really wanted to tell him. This is a desolate place and the day is now over. Send the crowds away. Why? To go into the villages and buy food for themselves. The disciples were keenly observant, and they saw a looming problem, a very large looming problem. They looked out and they saw thousands and thousands of people who had not eaten and would not be able to eat because they were not at home, they were not in towns or villages. Thousands and thousands of hungry people is a big problem. It was then, it is now. So they were keenly aware of the problem, that is the issue. These disciples are just like we are today. These disciples excelled at pointing out problems and pointing out issues. We excel at pointing out problems. We are expert in seeing problems and seeing issues. We go through life pointing out, hey, there's a problem over there. Oh, there's another issue. Oh, there's a problem over there. There's a problem over there. We're like those disciples. And they were not only proficient and expert at pointing out problems, they were proficient and expert in wanting the problem to go away or having someone else solve the problem for them. Send the crowds away. Make the problem go away. Have someone else solve the problem is what they were saying to do. We are just like that. In my career in business, over the years, in the military, over the years, I've had hundreds of people work for me. And hundreds of people can point out thousands and thousands of problems and issues. Hey, boss, look at this problem over here. Somebody needs something to do something about it. Hey, boss, we got an issue over here. I think we need to find somebody to solve it. People are so good at pointing out issues and then wanting the issue to go away or someone else to solve it. So as a young man with responsibilities for others, I learned that you cannot allow someone to dump thousands of problems in your lap and expect you to solve them. So the way I reacted to people pointing out problems to me over the years was, okay, there's a problem. What are we going to do to fix it? How are we going to solve that issue? How are we going to fix that issue so it doesn't occur again? What can we do to solve it and prevent it from happening again? My practice was always to engage them and not pointing out the problem, but solving the problem. And we go through life saying, oh, that's dirty over there, expecting someone else to clean it. As if our job is to point out faults and problems and issues and then ignore the solution and skate free. So I learned that you have to engage people who point out all the issues in solving the issues. Let them take ownership. So these guys were asking Jesus to make the problem go away. They didn't want to deal with it. Just like we don't want to deal with problems. We can make a list of all the problems in America today, and there's a lot of problems. And we expect someone else to solve those problems. We won't break a sweat trying to solve them ourselves. In many cases, national issues start as local issues. And in many cases, national solutions come from local solutions. So they said, send them away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves. Jesus sure turned the tables on them. That's what I did all those years. Jesus said, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. You solve the problem. You solve it. Now, how did they react? Excuses. They came up with excuses why they couldn't do anything. Just like we do today. We point out a problem. Someone says, well, solve it. You see it once you solve it. Oh, I can't fix that problem. I can't solve that problem. I don't have the training. I don't have the education. I don't have the skill. I don't have the talent. I don't have the tools. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the money. We're beautiful at pointing out problems, and we're beautiful expecting someone else to solve them. And when the spotlight shines on us, when we are in a position to solve them, we turn into becoming an excuse machine. So when Jesus said, you give them something to eat, they said, sorry, boss, we only have 5 loaves here and 2 fish. By the way, the loaves here were not the kind of loaves we see in a grocery store today. I mean, my goodness, you go into a grocery store today and the loaves of bread on the shelves, they're almost as long as from your elbow to your fingertips. They're massive. These were likely little barley cakes. And the barley cakes, little cakes, not the cakes we see today for a birthday, but ones that fit in your hand. They were the food of the poor. So what we have here, we don't see it in this rendition, but we see it in other Gospels, is that there is a kid, a young boy, who has some of these little barley cakes and a couple small fish. That's his food. That's his meal. That's going to provide him sustenance and nourishment for that whole day into the next day. And what does he do? He gives it up. He gives the food literally out of his mouth and gives it to one of the apostles for the work of God. That's quite a sacrifice. Have we ever taken all the food out of our refrigerator and given it away? Have we ever emptied our cupboards completely bare of all food and given it away, knowing we would not eat until the next day? I think not. I think not. That's what this boy did. And what did God, through Jesus Christ, do to this small sacrifice? It was a big sacrifice to the boy, but still it was only food for a little boy. What did God do with this sacrifice? He multiplied it by many thousands, many thousands. What if we truly made sacrifices to God with our time, with our talents, with our treasures, with our money? What if you had 15 people that did that? And what if Jesus took those sacrifices of time, talent, treasures from 15 people and multiplied it times 10,000? What would be the outcome? An entire county could be changed forever. An entire county could be changed forever. We just don't give God a chance to multiply our sacrifices, because our sacrifices for Him are usually very, very meager. So when they give Jesus an excuse why they cannot do anything, He says, bring them here to me. Bring the food here to me. You can almost see Him rolling His eyes and breathing a sigh of exasperation. And then Jesus ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. In the other gospel accounts, it said they sat down in groups of 50s and hundreds. We ask, why would Jesus do that? Because God is a God of order and discipline. He is not the God of confusion. He is not the God of chaos. He is not the God of clutter. He is the God of order and discipline. Having people sit down in groups enabled the distribution of the food in an orderly manner. If you had 5 or 10 or 15,000 people standing there just in a big crowd and you break out the food, you could have a riot. Jesus understood human nature. So now Jesus takes the loaves and the fish. He looks up to heaven and says a blessing. Then He broke the loaves and He gave them to the disciples. There are 4 verbs at work here. Took, blessed, broke, gave. Took, blessed, broke, gave. Those are the 4 words at the heart of this meal. Those are the 4 words at the core, at the heart, at the soul of Holy Communion, of the Lord's Supper. So He broke the loaves. He gave the loaves and the fish to whom? To the people? No. Jesus did not walk around feeding all those thousands of people one by one by one. He gave them to the disciples, and the disciples in turn distributed the food to the great crowd. The food that Jesus multiplied, the loaves and the fishes, those were the grace of God. They became God's grace, His gift. And how does God distribute His grace in this world? Most always, God distributes His grace through other people, to other people. God uses people as the mechanism and the vehicle through which His grace is dispensed. Even the grace of healing in a hospital, surgery, God's grace comes through the medical workers. God distributes His grace into the world through human beings. And if we bemoan the fact and criticize and cry out that God's not present, God's not present, He's present. He's waiting for us to do something with the grace He has given us. all ate and were satisfied. But there were some left over. There were broken pieces of the bread left over. That bread's the grace of God. They picked it up. We should never let the grace of God go to waste. So they had 12 baskets full. Now, people wonder, what does the number 12 mean here? Well, there were 12 disciples. So there are some practical aspects of 12 baskets. But also, that was the number of the 12 tribes of Israel. And as such, the number 12 here could mean a completion, a perfection. They all ate and were satisfied. But we ought not to waste the grace of God. And we read that those who were present were 5,000 men, and they did not count the women and the children. There's no telling how many thousands of people he fed. 10,000? 15,000? 20,000? We don't know. But it was probably several times 5,000. That's a population of some counties in America. Some whole counties in America, in essence, could have been fed with the food in one small picnic basket. This feeding of so many points toward a heavenly banquet that will take place at some future date when God assembles his children into heaven and feeds them. In the name of God, amen.